Story 1. Guilt Loop. Professor Eric Bramby stood in the dimly lit parking garage, his hand trembling on the car door handle. He'd just finished lecturing about the Mobius strip, a surface with only one side, where you can travel continuously and end up back where you started without ever crossing an edge. What he didn't know was that in exactly 4 minutes, he would become living proof of his own lecture. Now, as he settled into his sedan on level 4, something was already wrong. The air felt thick, and the fluorescent lights flickered. Standing in his car, he didn't notice the shadow moving in his rearview mirror. He didn't notice that the clock on his dashboard had stopped. But he was about to notice everything else. Eric exhaled slowly, letting his shoulders drop. The presentation had gone well, better than expected for a group of engineers and physicists who'd spent the entire lecture taking notes like their lives depended on it. Strange crowd, very strange, and strange place. He'd signed an NDA just to enter the building, hadn't even been told what the company actually produced. He sat in silence, the engine off, staring at the concrete pillar ahead. What now? What will he do? The question that haunted every evening. Drive home to the empty house where Margaret's reading glasses still sat on the nightstand? Stop for groceries he'd probably forget to cook? Or maybe grab takeout and pretend he wasn't eating alone again? Margaret. It had been 14 months since the accident. He'd been working late, lost in equations. She'd called and asked him to pick up her medication. He'd said he would. But he'd forgotten. And the stroke came that night. His fault. Definitely his fault. A simple loop of cause and effect his mind replayed endlessly. Eric turned the key. The engine growled to life. So, it's time to leave this place behind. He shifted into drive and began the descent. The parking garage was a spiral design, winding downward in a slow corkscrew. Level 4. Level 3. The numbers painted in yellow on the concrete walls passed by his window. His mind drifted to Margaret again, to the pharmacy receipt he'd found in her purse afterward, to the neurologist who'd said, if she'd had the medication, we might have had time. Level 2. Almost out. He thought about the Mobius strip he'd demonstrated today. How he'd taken a strip of paper, given it a half twist, and connected the ends. How he'd drawn a line along its surface to show there was no inside or outside, just one continuous path. The tires hummed against the concrete. Eric blinked. Level 4. What? How it possible? He jerked the steering wheel slightly, confused. The yellow number 4 glared at him from the pillar. How? He looked in his rearview mirror, trying to understand his mistake. Had he gone up instead of down? Impossible. He'd felt the downward slope. Okay, he muttered, lost in thought, that's all. He accelerated slightly, focusing now. Down the ramp. Level 3, level 2. Stay present, Eric. Don't think about her. Don't think about. Level 4. Again? His heart kicked against his ribs. This wasn't possible. He'd been paying attention this time. Every second. He'd watched the numbers. 3, then 2, then no. Not then. Now it was 4 again. Eric put the car in park, hands gripping the wheel. His breathing quickened. The parking garage was empty except for a few scattered vehicles, their owners presumably still upstairs in the classified facility. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow-green. He stepped out of the car. The air was colder than it should be, and there was a smell. Ozone, like after lightning strikes. Eric walked to the edge of the level, looking down the spiral ramp. He could see level 3 below, then level 2, then the exit with its daylight barrier in the distance. Straightforward. Looked so simple and nothing strange about the architecture. He got back in the car, took a breath, started driving again, this time keeping his eyes locked on the descending path. He wouldn't look away, wouldn't let his mind wander. Down. Level 3 passed, still descending. Level 2 approached. He could see the curve ahead that would lead to level 1, and then freedom. And then he finally saw it. It was a figure, standing at the edge of level 2, facing away from him. Familiar somehow. The silhouette of... Eric blinked. Level 4. No. No. His voice cracked in the enclosed space. This was insane. He'd been looking. He'd seen the progression. There was no way he could have circled back without noticing. Unless... the lecture. The Mobius strip. He'd explained it to them. Explained how if you traveled along the surface, you'd return to your starting point having traversed what seemed like both sides, yet never left the single continuous surface. A loop that defied intuitive geometry. "This is just stress," Eric said aloud, his voice shaking. "I'm tired. I'm projecting. I need to stop thinking about it. About everything." He stopped. In the rearview mirror, the figure was there. Closer now. Standing about 30 feet behind his car, still facing away. But the build, the posture, it looked like Margaret, or it seemed. Eric's blood turned to ice water. He snapped his head around to look directly, but there was nothing there. Only empty parking spaces and that same yellow-green light. When he looked back at the mirror, gone. His hands shook as he gripped the wheel. Okay. Okay. One more time. But this time, he'd do it differently. He'd count. He'd narrate every single second aloud so his mind couldn't trick him. "Starting at level 4, he said, his voice too loud. "Putting car in drive. Beginning descent. Entering the ramp. Passing the pillar. Level 3 sign ahead. Approaching. 3, 2, 1. Passing level 3 now. Continuing down. The curve. Feel the turn. Level 2 sign ahead." The figure stepped into his path. Eric slammed the brakes. The car screeched to a halt. It was Margaret, facing him now. But wrong. Her face was pale, lips blue. Level 4. Eric forced himself to think differently, to break the pattern. If his circular thinking was creating a closed system, then the solution was to stop thinking the same thoughts. But how? How do you stop thinking about something that's defined you for 14 months? He grabbed his phone, still showing 5:47 p.m., and opened the Notes app. Started typing. Margaret's death was not entirely my fault. I made a mistake. Mistakes are human. The stroke would have happened regardless based on her medical history. I could not have prevented it with certainty. I am allowed to forgive myself. The words felt hollow. Lies he'd tried to tell himself 1,000 times before. But he kept typing. I am not my worst moment. I am not a loop. The lights in the garage flickered and went out. In the darkness, Eric heard it. A sound like fabric tearing. No, like reality tearing. And in that tear, he understood something the classified facility had probably discovered. The Mobius strip wasn't just a mathematical curiosity. It was a map of consciousness itself. Thoughts returning to their origin. Guilt spiraling back to guilt. And in some configuration of space-time mind, that loop could become literal. The company wasn't studying topology. They were studying consciousness traps. And he just volunteered to demonstrate one. A new approach formed in his mind. Not denial. Not affirmation. something else. "I accept it," he said into the darkness. "All of it. I forgot the medication. She died. I carry that. But I don't have to carry it forever. I don't have to descend the same levels over and over." Eric was hyperventilating now. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to center himself. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. But he knew, God help him, he knew what was happening. The lecture he'd given. The company had requested the Mobius strip specifically. And not just mathematics. What exactly did they want to know? They'd wanted to know about the paradoxes, about Klein bottles, surfaces with no distinct inside or outside, about non-orientable manifolds, about what happens when space curves back on itself. And he'd talked about consciousness too. A thought experiment he'd mentioned casually. What if perception itself could form a closed loop? If your mind got stuck in a recursive pattern, would reality reflect it? Or would reality be it? "I'm thinking in circles," Eric whispered. The same thoughts, over and over. Margaret that evening, the medication and his guilt, descending through the levels of his shame. Every time his mind completed the circuit, blame, regret, despair, repeat, he returned to level 4, the starting point, the moment before the descent. It wasn't the parking garage that was looped, it was him. He looked at the dashboard clock, still frozen at 5:47 p.m., the exact time he'd sat down in this car. How many iterations had he completed? 10? 20? How long had he been trapped in his own mental Mobius strip, unable to escape because every path led back to the same thought? The figure appeared again, this time in his peripheral vision. Margaret, standing beside the car, looking at him through the window. He refused to turn his head, refused to acknowledge her. "You're not real," he said. "You're my guilt, my loop." Her reflection in the window moved its mouth, but he heard no sound. The lights blazed back on. Eric was on level 2. He hadn't moved the car, hadn't turned the key. But somehow, the loop had broken. Or he'd broken it. He looked in the rearview mirror one last time. Margaret stood there, but different now. Not the blue-lipped specter of his guilt, but her actual face. The way she looked when she smiled at his terrible jokes, when she told him to come to bed and stop working. She raised one hand, not an accusation, in goodbye. Eric felt tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "I'm sorry. I love you. I'm sorry." And then she was gone, truly gone, not hidden in shadows or lurking in his peripheral vision, but released, let go. He put the car in drive, descended past level 1, emerged into the parking lot. The evening sun hit his windshield, blindingly bright after the artificial lights. The dashboard clock jumped forward. 6:23 p.m. 36 minutes gone. Or an eternity, depending on how you measured. As Eric drove toward the exit, he glanced back at the garage one final time. In the distance, on what might have been level 4, he saw other cars, other people sitting motionless, other loops being traveled. He understood. The facility hadn't hired him to lecture. They'd hired him to demonstrate. He never found out what they were really working on in that building. Never asked, never returned, despite multiple requests. But sometimes, late at night, Eric thinks about the Mobius strip, about how consciousness can trap itself in loops of thought, descending through levels that lead only back to the beginning. And he thinks about the others, the ones still driving those ramps, still seeing the shadows of their guilt, still unable to break the pattern. Because the scariest thing about a Mobius loop isn't that you're trapped. It's that part of you doesn't want to escape. But you have to. You have to live. Story 2. Mystic Message. John never believed in ghosts. Not until the dead started leaving him messages in a parking garage. And what they wanted from him? That would cost him everything he thought he knew about reality. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started. Because the thing about supernatural encounters is they never announce themselves with thunder and lightning. They slip into your life quietly, disguised as something ordinary. Something you could easily ignore until you already can't. Every evening at 6:30 p.m., John would take the elevator down to sub-level 2 of the Parker Business Center. Every time the same routine. 5 years. Same parking spot next to pillar number 3. He'd unlock his gray Honda, toss his briefcase in the passenger seat, and drive home through the same traffic, listening to the same podcasts. You know the type. A man who found comfort in predictability. He was that kind of person who'd never experienced anything that couldn't be explained by logic and reason. The Tuesday started like any other, but when John approached his car, something was different. There, on the concrete pillar, written in what looked like black marker, were 5 words that would unravel his entire understanding of what's possible. Hi, John. I like you. Now, here's where most people would shrug it off. Office prank, right? Or maybe Sarah from accounting getting brave. Or Tom from IT being weird. John smiled, felt a little flutter of flattery, and pulled out his own marker from his briefcase. He scribbled back, "Hi, whoever you are." He drove home thinking about it. Who could it be? It's interesting. It's a quest. But by the time he reached his apartment, he'd already moved on. Wednesday morning meetings, reports, and that message faded into background noise until the next evening. "I need your help. Abigail Lance." John stared at the fresh writing on the pillar. Abigail Lance. He didn't know Abigail. He ran through his mental database of colleagues, clients, that woman from the coffee shop who always remembered his order. Nothing. No one. But something about the name felt heavy. This wasn't flirtation anymore. Who will be signed in this situation? He wrote back with a smirk. "You know, my services are very expensive." He thought he was being clever. Maybe this Abigail would reveal herself. They'd laugh about it, grab drinks. That's what normal people do. Normal people don't Google names and find obituaries. But that's exactly what John found when he got home and typed Abigail Lance Parker Business Center into his search bar. The article was 3 months old. Local woman dies by suicide in downtown parking garage. There was a photo. A young woman, maybe 30, with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. The article mentioned she'd been struggling with depression. It mentioned she'd jumped from sub-level 2 of the Parker Business Center parking garage. Sub-level 2, where John parked every single day. Now, I want you to imagine what's going through John's head right now. Because this is where fear starts to calcify in your chest. When coincidence becomes too specific to dismiss. When your rational mind starts throwing up explanations. Someone's messing with you. Someone reads the same article. Someone thinks this is funny. But none of them feel quite right. John was angry, almost furious actually. And this wasn't funny anymore. Someone was using a dead woman's name to play games, and he was going to catch them. That night, John installed a small camera in his car. One of those dash cams with a wide-angle lens, but he positioned it differently. Aimed it directly at pillar number 3, He wanted footage. He wanted proof. He wanted to march up to HR and get whoever was doing this fired. Thursday evening, John practically ran to his car. He needed to see what the camera caught. But first, he had to check the pillar. The message was there. Oops, didn't think you were mercenary. But anyway, in the ventilation duct near junction R385, there's a briefcase for you. John's hands were shaking now. R385. That was already specific. Too specific for a prank. But it was the word mercenary that got him. Because only someone who'd read his response, "My services are very expensive," would write that. And the camera would prove someone had been there. He should have gone home. He should have called the police right then. But curiosity is a hook that digs deeper than fear. And John was already caught. Junction R385 was in the maintenance area, behind a restricted access door that was always propped open because the lock had been broken for months. John found the ventilation duct, reached inside, and his fingers touched leather. The briefcase was old, scuffed. It was closed, but John already knew what was there. Inside was cash, $250,000. His brain couldn't process it. Why was this here? Who put it here? Was it Abigail's? Was this some kind of drug money? Evidence? Dirty cash that someone needed to hide? Every question led to darker places, but John couldn't stop asking them. He took the briefcase to his car, locked the doors, and then he remembered the camera. This is the moment that separates the skeptics from the believers. The moment when reality cracks open and shows you what's underneath. Because what John saw on that footage should not have been possible. The video showed the pillar. Empty. Blank concrete. Then, at 5:23 p.m., while John was still in his office 3 floors up, letters began to appear. Not drawn. Not painted. They materialized like ink bleeding through paper from the other side, one character at a time, forming words. Didn't think you were mercenary. John was shocked. There was nobody there, no hand, not even a shadow. Just letters appearing out of nothing. He watched it 7 times, checked the metadata, looked for editing glitches, digital artifacts, anything that would explain what he was seeing. The video was clean. He didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those letters forming on concrete. Every time he opened them, he stared at the briefcase sitting on his kitchen table, filled with money that shouldn't exist, left by someone who was dead. Friday morning, John called in sick. First time in 3 years. But he drove to the Parker Business Center anyway, because he needed to see if there would be another message. Because, despite every instinct screaming at him to run, to move, to forget any of this happened, he had to know what came next. The message was waiting. Don't be afraid. The money is yours. Tell Lieutenant Mike Philly this name. Lloyd Ferguson, parking attendant. That's all. Lloyd Ferguson. John knew him. The guy who worked the booth, who waved at John every morning with that gap-toothed smile, who talked about his grandkids and complained about his knees. That Lloyd Ferguson. This was the moment John had to make a choice. Abigail Lance was dead, but she was still here, still communicating, still asking for help from beyond whatever veil separates the living from the dead. And she'd paid him $250,000 to deliver a name to a police lieutenant. John spent 3 days researching. He found Lieutenant Mike Philly working homicide. He found every article he could on Abigail Lance's death. The official ruling was suicide. No investigation, and not even suspects. Just a tragic ending to a troubled life. But Abigail was telling him it was murder, and she was telling him who did it. John assembled everything: photos of the messages, the video footage of letters appearing on concrete, screenshots of the obituary, detailed timeline of events. He printed the articles about Abigail. He wrote down the location of the briefcase, still sitting in that ventilation duct, because he hadn't touched the money. Not really. It felt too much like payment for something he didn't understand yet. He put it all in an envelope, no return address, mailed it to Lieutenant Mike Philly at the precinct. Then John did what anyone would do when the dead start leaving you messages in parking garages. He packed his apartment, gave notice at work, and moved 200 miles away to a city where he didn't know anyone and nobody knew him. 3 weeks later, scrolling through news on his phone in his new apartment, John saw the headline, "Parking attendant arrested in connection with 2024 death investigation." The article said police had received an anonymous tip that led them to investigate Lloyd Ferguson, 52, who worked at the Parker Business Center. During a search of Ferguson's home, investigators found a scarf belonging to Abigail Lance, with trace amounts of her skin cells embedded in the fabric. Further investigation revealed Ferguson had been harassing Abigail for months before her death. Security footage showed him following her. Co-workers reported she'd complained about him. The working theory was that Ferguson had cornered her on sub-level 2. There'd been an altercation, and what was ruled a suicide was actually a murder made to look like one. Lloyd Ferguson confessed to manslaughter 3 days after his arrest. John read the article 5 times. Then he opened his banking app and looked at the balance. He'd found the briefcase again before he moved, tucked in that same ventilation duct. He'd deposited the money over several weeks in small amounts, telling himself it was payment for doing the right thing, for giving Abigail the justice she deserved. But late at night, in his new apartment in a new city, John thinks about those letters appearing on concrete. He thinks about a dead woman who somehow knew he parked next to Pillar 3 every evening, who knew he'd help her if she paid him enough, who knew exactly where evidence was hidden that would convict her killer. The rational part of his brain still tries to explain it. Elaborate prank, coincidence, shared delusion. But John knows what he saw. He knows the dead can speak if they want to, badly enough. And he knows that Abigail Lance chose him for a reason he'll never fully understand. Sometimes, when he parks in his new garage, deliberately choosing a different spot every day, never the same place twice, John wonders if she's still out there, if other spirits are watching, waiting, looking for someone who'll listen, someone who'll help, someone willing to accept payment from beyond the grave. He never sees messages anymore, but every time he walks to his car, John checks the pillars anyway. Because once you know the dead can reach out and touch the living world, you realize you're never really alone. And that knowledge changes everything. It changes how you see empty parking garages at night. It changes how you think about the boundary between life and death. It changes what you believe is possible. The question is, what would you do if you found a message with your name on it, written by someone who shouldn't be able to write anything at all? Would you ignore it? Would you investigate? Would you help? Or would you do what John did, take the money, deliver the message, and run as far as you could from the truth that some debts follow you beyond death, and some voices refuse to be silenced just because their bodies are gone? Think about that next time you're alone in a parking garage. You never know who might be trying to reach you. And if you see your name written in letters that shouldn't exist, remember, they already know where you park. What do you think?